My YouTube channel is to try and explain to Scotland its real history, and it's also to try and sort out and correct myths by the Unionists against Scotland. But this video is distinctly history only, and I'm going to talk about some Scottish place name words. And behind places, there's usually groups of people or individuals. I hope you find this interesting. It may give you some history that you didn't know about places you may know. Some parts of Scotland have the road signs and place names in Gaelic nowadays. That's the yellow writing. And you can see the enunciation written in English underneath. So I'm going to talk about these 10 words and give you the meaning of these 10 words. They're all important in Scotland's history. So here we go. Alba, pronounced Alaba, is the name of Scotland when it was founded in the year 843, when the Pictish tribe from the east and the Scottish tribe from the west merged to create this kingdom, Alba. Its first leader was Kenneth MacAlpine, that's obviously translated into English, who came from the Scottish tribe. The name Alba itself means land of light, although some people think it means the White Land. This little map here, bottom left, is Northern Ireland, facing across the sea to southwest Scotland. And the closest it gets is from a peninsula called Kintyre, which is only 12 miles away. So people there could easily see the land, especially in the winter with snow. That's where the idea of the White Land comes from. But I'm going to explain that the word Alba is much different. The actual word goes back several thousand years to the founding of languages in Europe. And it was Alvo, meaning white or bright. BH means V. And Alba, pronounced Alba, is a word in 3 countries that means white, bright, or dawn. It can be first name or surname. But Portugal is the root of Irish Gaelic, and Alvo is part of their language. The mainland of Britain, the original Brittonic Celtic languages, came from France and the Netherlands. Ireland was different. I'm now going to talk about Scotland, where its name came from, but to do that I need to tell you a bit about the founding of Alba. The Pictish tribes were in these areas. We don't know what they called themselves. This is the name the Romans gave them in the 1st century. These were people that had tattoos, so they were the picture people. But we don't know their names from themselves. But the Scottish came from here, and that's what they did call themselves. And they moved around the year 100 to here, and then eventually to here. The Picts had several kingdoms, and this is the name of the 7 Celtic kingdoms, the Pictish kingdoms. The Irish kingdom of the Scottish was called Dalriata or Dalriada. Dal just means an area of land, and it's believed that Riata was a person's name, but they don't know who. By the time 800 came, they had these 5 areas. The kennel just means the land basically ministered by an individual, and that was their names at the time, real people's names. So Dalriata and the Picts, the boundaries of their empires rubbed against each other. I'm sure it was peaceful sometimes, but not all the time. This is the same map on the left here that I've just shown you. So what happened is, as you can see, Dalriata no longer includes Northern Ireland, because by 1050 Alba had been created. And what happened with Alba was because the Scottish tribe, the Irish Gaelic speakers, took over the leadership. The Pict leadership would learn that language because they had to, because of the courts, and in time it worked down the tree, and in time it separated from Ireland and became Scots Gaelic. So around 1050, the people that Scotland, Alba, traded with at the time had been for some time calling it the land of the Scotty because everybody spoke the Scottish language. Or nearly everybody, certainly the leaders did. So by 1050, it changed its name to Scotland. By natural change, and the word came from outside of Scotland. Before I go on, I want to mention the Britons who had this area down here. They are mentioned in a couple of slides to come. The Britons were pushed out of southern England when the Angles and the Saxons moved in after the Romans left in 410 AD. So it was immigration over time pushed these people, some to Scotland here, some to Cornwall and the Cornwall language, and some to Brittany, the land of the Bretons in France. Saltire is the flag of the people of Scotland. Andrew, one of the original 12 disciples of Jesus, was crucified in Greece in around 60 AD. And the Greeks used the diagonal cross you see here, not the one that's normally visioned for the Romans in the terms of the crucifixion of Jesus. And the reason the Greeks used this was the Roman cross was useless because the weight of the body sometimes pulled itself off the nails, whereas if you use this shape of cross, the body tends not to fall off. In time, that shape became known as St. Andrew's cross, and a heraldic symbol, the cross, within Scotland. The word has two origins from France and medieval Latin, and you can see there's a commonality between our spelling of saltire and the French and the Latin version. A person who later became known as Saint Regulus took the bones of Andrew from Greece. He wanted to get away from the Roman Empire, and he sailed and landed on a beach in the east of Fife that is today called St. Andrews, and he built a small chapel, and that's where he put the bones. History tells us that 732 more bones were brought, but I'm sure this is politics by the church at the time to try and get more pilgrims to come and therefore make more money. But the flag itself, the first written, I emphasize written, record of the saltire being used was at a battle in 832 in what is today East Lothian, 5 miles to the northeast of the town of Haddington. It's a village called Athelstan, and what happened in 832 was a group of Pict and Briton warriors flying proudly the saltire flag met an army from Northumberland under a general called Athelstan, and they had a battle and Athelstan won. That's why it's called Athelstan now, and not the name of the leader of the Pictish and Bret team. There's a myth that Scotland supporters won that battle, but it's just simply not true. The name Athelstan being there simply tells you he won. There's another myth that at the battle, just before the battle, which apparently we won, there was two clouds that crossed, and that formed the saltire flag, because the leader at the time thought that represented St. Andrew. But that's not true either, because the written cross, the name was used well before from St. Andrews from the 4th century, and it was used in the flag at the battle. The flag was created before the battle, not after. This shows you the flight plan of some 9th century jet fighters. But the saltire is the flag of the people of Scotland. seen here in the colour it should be, light blue, the colour of the sky, not dark blue as you see sometimes. Inchtoot Hill, a name few Scots will know of, but it's a Roman town that was being built. The Romans called it Alata Castra. Castra tells you that they had a cavalry regiment, which for the Romans was unusual. To give you some background, the Romans invaded southern England, which they called Britannia, in 43 AD with 4 legions. They very quickly moved through Britannia, and then the governor of Britannia, Gnaeus Julius Agricola, decided to invade Caledonia, which was their name for Scotland, with 20,000 men. What you see here is the first line of Roman forts that they built up the east coast of Scotland. It actually went round up past the northeast of Scotland towards Inverness. What you see here is where Inchtoot Hill is. This is it from the air now. It was built by the 20th Legion and it covered 53 acres. It was constructed between 83 AD and 87 AD. In 87 AD, Agricola pulled out of Scotland, not because he couldn't handle the fight with the Picts and the local tribes. It was because the 2nd Legion, which was behind him to protect him, was dragged out of Britannia to go to Dacia, which is today Romania, to solve another problem within the then Roman Empire. So they pulled out, but they buried over 800,000 nails and lots of tools in the Inchtoot Hill area because they intended to come back, but they never did. And that's the size today of the building that's been all measured out due to several archaeological surveys. That's what they think it looked like. It was well advanced by the time they abandoned it. There was even 2 aqueducts that brought in water from about 2 miles away. One for the stables and the horses and one for the people. And this is where it is. There's the River Tay. This road here is Perth down the bottom, coming up through the village of Mortley, over the bridge over the Tay to the village of Capooth. This road here was built just after 1746 by the colonisers of Scotland as part of their military invasion. And that goes Blairgowrie to Dunkeld. And you can see clearly here where Inchtoot Hill is. Nearby was the city of Perth. The Romans called it Bertha, which is believed at the time to mean wood or copse. The same map again, as you can see, there's Inchtoot and there's Bertha on the River Tay estuary. It's part of the fortifications as the army moved forward up the east coast of Scotland, and it was the highest navigational point on the Tay. And there was a ford there, and eventually I suspect they were going to build a bridge, but they never did. Today the navigational point is much farther downriver, because the land of Scotland's risen quite a few metres since the ice melted when the weight was lifted. So here's a sketch from an archaeological dig. There's the River Almond meeting the River Tay. There's a wood here which is still there today, and there's the road A9 going from Perth north to Dunkeld and Inverness. And there's the boundary of the Roman fort of Bethra. It's all gone now due to ploughing and flooding. But in the woods here, if you go in there, you can, with a bit of effort, you can see part of the mound that went around it. It was a large site, as you can see here. This is today. This is the River Almond again, and this is an industrial estate at the northern side of the city of Perth. That's the A9 road going north, and this is where the Roman Fort Bethra was, as the River Tay and the Almond meet. This area here was starting to get developed by the local Perthshire Council in 2023. It's going to have 3,000 homes, shops, schools, and it's called Bertha in recognition of the old name of Perth. Fortievit is a small village 8 miles to the west of Perth that nobody's heard of. But it's very important in Scottish history because it's the place of the sons of Alpin. So when Kenneth MacAlpine became the first king of Scotland, or Alba, in 843, he built his administrative centre at Fortievit. Fortievit itself had several different geological digs, archaeological digs, and some of the stuff goes back 2000 BC, daggers, jewellery and so on. So it's been people have lived here for a long time because it's good land. There was an arch found in the Water of May, which was built in the early 9th century as part of the building by Kenneth MacAlpine of the location of Fortievit, and that today is in the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh. But it's been inhabited as the royal residence of the kings of Alba since the 9th century. Kenneth MacAlpine, our first leader, died there in the year 858. Kenneth was succeeded by his son Domnall. It is believed he was murdered in a later fort built on the grounds of the Roman fort in Bertha. His nephew took over as the king of Alba, and because he became a Christian, he changed his name to Constantine. Constantine built 4 huge crosses a mile to the north, east, west and south of Fortievit. One of them still exists today in the 12th century tower of the Church of St. Serphs in Dunning, a village 2 or 3 miles away. The east and west crosses disappeared, and the one to the south is in 3 pieces, again in the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh. That's the church there now for 160 people that live there. And in 1766 there was a bridge built there to cross the River Erne to connect this area to the city of Perth. 40-ton lorries go across that bridge every day, and 2 cars can pass each other with care. This is what the village looks like today, built in the 1930s in the style of an English village. This is where it is. There's the River Erne, and that's the bridge I told you about. So there's Fortievit, and this is a bridge to the east to a place we now call Bridge of Erne. This is the road to the west that goes to Dunning. This road here goes to Perth, and this road here goes to Stirling. Stockit. No one in Scotland probably knows this name, but it's very important. It was a wood to the west of Aberdeen. It's not a very good copy, I'm sorry, but this is the boundary of the city of Aberdeen today. And this is the River Dee. And Aberdeen originally would have been here. And all this land here was gorse land, and it was a forest. And it was owned by Robert the Bruce, King of Scotland. It was surrounded by cairns to mark the boundary, but today there's a line of numbered stones that you can follow around to see where the boundary was. Because the borough of Aberdeen supported King Robert the Bruce at his battle on the island of Barra in 1308, in 1313 Robert the Bruce gave this land, the Stockit, to the town. It was eventually be called the Freedom Lands, but it was an extensive area of rough land and lots of trees. What actually happened was there was a charter granted in 1319 where the land was given to the people. And the people, it was wealthy, and it allowed the borough and people of Aberdeen to build their city up, build the United Kingdom's first university. But most of all, they put money aside, far thinking in those days, to help the poor. This Common Good Fund for Aberdeen was copied by all the other boroughs in Scotland, and it became named as the Common Good Fund, founded by the Charter of the Stockit, a forest to the west of Aberdeen, and it's still in use today. Every council has money in the Common Good Fund, although not as much as it used to. After 1947, with the health laws and the social benefits of the social state, things were taken off the council politically, so the money in the Good Fund became less, but it's still there. There's several million, for instance, in Perthshire in the fund, but it's declined. To give an example of ports, people like Perth and round the coast of Scotland, any town on the coast could have anchorage for ships and boats, and you can charge money for that. But at the end of the 1970s, the government of the time sold all these off to private individuals who 20 years later made a profit and sold them to hedge funds. This is all very good, except Westminster has no legal right to sell the land of Scotland because that belongs to the people. The Scottish Government here in 28th of July 18 clarified the law with regard to the councils for property aligned to the Common Good Fund. It's a unique law in Scotland. No other country in the world has this, with that history. Although the place name for this village is Scone, its Gaelic name was Scian, which means a lump or mass of land. And the Scots word used today by everyone for that village is Scone, which is obviously taken from Scian. And Scone is a village of 5,000 people, roughly 3 miles north of Perth. And just beside it on a different road is where the old village of Scone used to be. There's a palace there now, owned by the Mansfield family, but originally there was an Augustan Abbey there, built around 500, and that's where the Stone of Destiny is, and the Stone of Destiny was used for the crowning of all the Scottish monarchs. The history books say from 843 onwards to 1651, but I would be guessing that with the Abbey there, the actual stone and the crowning ceremony specifically then for Picts would have been going on at that time. The Abbey was damaged in 1559, and slowly the palace that eventually you see there today was built. And beside that palace there's a small chapel, which there's a sign there, you can see it in the little triangle at the front, called the Moot Hill, which is an English word. So here's that chapel, and a close-up of the wooden board that you see there. It calls it a Moot Hill, where the kings were done. But as I just mentioned, moot is an English word, only used in the southern half of England around the 12 to 1500s, and it was never a Scots word. But this is what the Moot Hill means, and whoever put that plaque there doesn't really know anything about Scottish history, as is used a definition for the moot word in England. But the mound is called a scian. The clue is the village name, and a scian is a mound or an area of land. And because this was used for the crowning, the Gaelic word and the word used by the Picts would have been something like Tom Avoid, which means the hill of the court. MH is V in Gaelic. So you can see that history gets distorted by the ignorance of the person creating the signs. On it, the Stone of Destiny, made here of Perthshire sandstone, was captured by England in 1296 in a usual regular battles, and it went in the coronation chair down in Westminster. But it is returned to a new museum in Perth in 2024. About the stone there are two myths: that this was hastily put together knowing that Edward from England was coming. So they made a fake, and the original stone in several sources of writing was a black rock. This is the story of one of the myths, although if you look at the names in the myths of Macbeth, it couldn't possibly tie in with what Edward did. But there's two other myths, and many people believe this was a fake. Glasgow. Its name came from the Brets and the Britons, who called it Glasgow. The Britons, as I mentioned, came from the south of England to escape the immigration from Germany. And this is the River Clyde up to its estuary. And they had their capital here on the estuary, they called Dunad. And this is the empire they had, which eventually became part of Alaba. And they called it An Clwyd. And the wide valley that goes round it and up the top, that's the word Ystrad Clwyd, means the wide valley of the Clwyd, but the river was called Clwyd. The river eventually changed its name to Clutha, and then in the 11th century it became Clyde. As I said, it became part of Alaba, this area, in the 11th century. There's a conflict in opinion about when Glasgow was founded. I believe the first one. The story goes that some monks from Augustine came in 500 AD and built an abbey where Glasgow is today, and there was nothing there at that time. But politics, a person called Mungo, who later became a saint who lived by, they said that he started it around the year 565, 570. But that's propaganda, I believe, for the churches. The original written record from the Irish Annals say it was founded in 500. And the monks called it Familia, simply meaning family, the Augustine family. But the Britons changed its name to Glasgow, which means the dear green place, which became Glasgow in town. And finally, to Edinburgh. Edinburgh means the royal borough in Eden, and before that it was called the Castle in Eden. In the old Brittonic languages of the Picts and the Cymry, the area around Edinburgh was known as Eden, which literally means gorse bushes. The old Welsh word Ethin means the same, from the same time period. And we know that it was there in the year 570 because the Gododdin people that at that time lived in what is the current Northumberland and the different Lothians up to Edinburgh existed because they called the place Din Eden, a castle in the district of Eden. And that was in a battle in 570 in Yorkshire, but it was referred to in that story. But the Romans knew there was two hill forts here, one on the basalt peak that is now Edinburgh, and another to the east in Haddington. So there's a castle on that rock in Edinburgh, been here for 2,000 years, in various forms. In time, the Irish Gaelic for Alaba changed to Scotty, and the name of the castle became Dun Eden. In 1018, Scotland took over that area of the coast down to Northumbria at a battle in 1018 when King Malcolm of Scotland, based in the royal palace in the town of Dunfermline in Fife, won. The original charter has been lost, and we know there was one for Edinburgh because it's referred to, but we don't know where it is. But King David I in 1124 granted a toft of land for Edinburgh to the Priory of Dunfermline. A toft is an area of land, a bit like a dal, a toft, or a pit. These were middle and ancient names of land area. In fact, if you keep your eyes open driving around Scotland, especially in the east and the south, you'll see toft stated a few times. So by the end of the 14th century, the name of Edinburgh had changed from Dun-Edin to Edinburgh, the royal borough in the district of Eden. This is a character sketch from the 13th century. So there's the castle up on top of the hill. And this became the Royal Mile in time. And there's a palace at the bottom. And you can see houses and hear fields. And there's the Nor Loch. It doesn't exist now. A loch there and a loch here. Here's a caricature from the 16th century, very formalized, and the 18th century. But it had grown so that this picture painted in 1827 of the Lawn Market in Edinburgh shows how much the city had grown. The highest point of the castle, there's a small chapel. It's very beautiful inside, unlike the outside, and it's said to be the oldest building in Edinburgh. I'm a bit confused because the castle was there beforehand, and the oldest stones found in the current castle are from the middle of the 9th century. But the main buildings in the castle were built by the colonial invaders in the 18th century. That's what you see now. So maybe that's what it's referring to. Finally, that's the 10 place names. You can see here the different aspects into the Scottish language from various sources. You've got the Norse languages that came here. You had the Brythonic languages of the Picts, the Irish Gaelic languages here, the Briton language from the south of England from the year 500 and so on, the northern languages Cymric, and the languages of Denmark here that eventually became Northumbria once it displaced the Gododin. So where and what happened to all this? So Aberdeen, Abernethy, is a confluence of water. A stream joins a stream joins a river joins a sea. That's a confluence, and that's where the Irish, Gaelic and Cymric word Aber comes from. In Scots, the word is Inver, Inverness, Inverkeithing. If you live in Scotland and the place you live starts with a pit, a col, or a doll, you know it's got Pictish origins. A wide valley in the Brett language was Eastad. It's Strath in Scots without the T. And it's in Irish Gaelic, it's Strath, but most people in Scotland say a wide valley is the Irish way, Strath, but that's not correct. A Cymric language down at the bottom in the southern uplands of Scotland, a hill is a blain, whereas in Irish Gaelic it's Kinnock, and in Scottish Gaelic it's Vain. So all these tribes and all these peoples that came here and had been here a long time, where did Scots come from? Where's the Scot language and the English language in that map you see? The Scots language started here, and it's a mixture of these languages and the influence of the Norse. And it probably started naturally way back before the year 1000, and it moved, and it eventually became to be the language of the court of Scotland in the early 1400s. And it's got aspects of all these languages within the Scots language. But today, the Scots language and the Gaelic language are nearly extinct. In fact, the Scots language is considered by UNESCO as in danger of disappearing. Unless something's done, by the year 2050, nobody will be speaking Scots in Scotland. The English language started as a mix of Saxons and Angles from Germany, Jutes from Denmark, and later they had influence from France and Latin, and sometimes Norse. In Scotland, the English in 1708 made Scotland a colony, and over 150 years they removed 4 million Scots and replaced them by 2 million English people. In 872 they passed a law in London that forbade the teaching of Scots or Gaelic. Gaelic was nearly destroyed, and the Scots language held on despite the fact everybody was taught English because of the tight communities around mining, fishing, farming and manufacturing and so on. But they've gone now, so the language is suffering. However, there is hope. In 2005, the Scottish Parliament did something, and again in 2016, to protect the Gaelic language. And slowly but surely, the number of Gaelic speakers, Scottish Gaelic, is increasing. Much belatedly, they're now starting to do the same for the Scots language. And they're looking at how do we teach it. So there's money being spent to actually allow the teaching formally of Scots again within Scotland. Obviously, English teaching will continue. So that's the end of my talk. 10 place names that hopefully I've given you a little bit understanding of our history within it through those place names, and a little bit about where our language came from. Thank you very much for listening. But before you go, these are a list of all the videos I've made on YouTube. @RobertAnderson9116 is my channel. If you key that into the search bar at the top in YouTube, you'll find all these videos, or you can key in the specific video. RobertAnderson9116 is my handle. If you'd like to subscribe, if you're happy with it, I'd very much appreciate it. This is my plans for the future. The one next up is the origins of Brexit. Why did it happen? I need to find out where the law is within the complex system of the European Parliament, but hopefully I'll find it, and that will show you what's happening. Thanks very much for listening. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my videos. Goodbye.